And we are live. Here we go. This is Harry Burton, very kindly spending some time with me today, talking about Harold Pinter. So, if you don't mind, Harry, just to say that quote again just now, is it "Beware of losing yourself within a mass consciousness"? Was that right?
Yes. It's not a quote. I was making it up, but
Okay.
I think it is something that one can take from Harold's work. That anyone who signs their individuality, their personal freedom over to any kind of corporation is in danger of getting what they deserve.
Mm.
You see that in so many of the early plays.
Yeah.
The Dumb Waiter, where they talk about the organisation.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, people have speculated about what could they possibly mean, but it doesn't matter precisely what they mean.
Mm.
The point is that these two have given themselves up, and now all I don't know if you know that play, but
Yeah, I do.
Ben says to Gus, look at me, look at me. I've got my woodwork, I've got my model boats, and that is supposed to be the life of his soul.
Mm.
In other words, that when you that Harold's thing is when a person gives themselves up to a corporation in order to have an identity and a sense of safety and a sense of belonging to something that they can hide behind, the possibilities for a human being shrivel to the narrowest of options.
Mm.
And lying on Hampstead Heath looking at the stars ain't on the menu. It's model boats and look at poor Stanley in the birthday party. He's walked away from another organisation who eventually come looking for him, which is partly what he's terrified of, because, that's what I mean about paralysis. You make a decision like deferring, and then are you going to spend the next 3 years going, oh, what have I done? Have I done the right thing? Oh, fuck. Stanley's sent himself into a kind of nervous breakdown, a paralysis, where nowadays he can't even get out of his pyjamas because he can't trust that his instinct to get away from the organisation was the right one. Consequently, in some kind of Kafkaesque way, he is simply paving the way for them to come and find it. Because, that is Harold's debt to Kafka, is the idea that if you can't get out from underneath the oppressive structures that you've been born into, you will be crushed by them.
Yeah.
Now, if we then think about the Caretaker, and especially Aston, the problem for Aston is that he was rebelling. He did kick up a fuss. He did say, don't fucking tell me who to be, and they zapped his brain for it. So
yeah.
there are circumstances in which you're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't.
Yeah.
And that's exactly the razor's edge where Harold Pinter tried to live his life.
Yeah. He did.
And his characters reflect that. Either you look at Lenny in The Homecoming. I mean, he seems to be pretty toxic. He seems to be running a roster of girls up in Soho. Fine, we can make a moral judgment about him for that. But he's not going to an office every day to be a boring pen pusher or an accountant. He may have to pay the piper for doing immoral things. We don't know. But even a character like Lenny seems to have embraced more of his individuality and and have a certain amount of freedom, even if it's to do things that you and I might choose not to do. But compared to Stanley, who is paralysed in a fucking boarding house at the end of at the bottom of the south coast, where he's going to have to get in the Channel if he wants to get away any further. Do you see what I'm getting at?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a great one of Harold's speeches, I think, to the Nobel. I think he won the Nobel Literature Prize back in 2005. I think it was, or whatever it was, a few years before he died, and he had this incredible speech. I've listened to it, particularly about it's a vicious verbal attack, specifically on the political acts of the United States, and he talks about how the United States went into Iraq not just to get so-called weapons of mass destruction, but to go there and actually cause their own destruction themselves by destroying villages, by destroying people's livelihoods, innocent lives, basically. And he told a story that he was invited to America to some sort of consult. I'm not quite sure what it was, but an American political representative who was there went up to Harold and said to him, "I really enjoyed your plays," and him in his Pinteresque way just refused to answer. He completely blanked him. And so there is a lot of politicalness, and that's really interesting to hear specifically about that. I remember seeing The Dumb Waiter, the production at the Hampstead Theatre just before we lost the theatres to Tier 3, just before Christmas. And I have to say, I left the theatre with my jaw still on the floor because that punch at the end, that twist. I walked out of the theatre genuinely thinking to myself, how the hell was that the case? And how was it? And then I went away, did some research, and there was a lot of talk about as you talked about just now, the political aspect of it, how there is someone sending the orders down from above. So there's this hierarchical, like the Prime Minister, the Conservative government, sending orders down, and it's us as the population's ability just to not question it, but just to do it, and in that case it was coming down, it was form like food orders, like scampi or liver and onions or something like that, and that was really interesting to see in there.
And they're still the two guys are still jumping through the hoops trying to make the right response. They're still saying, we better send something up, instead of saying fuck this, let's get the fuck out. They're fucking with our heads. They're still being good corporate men. They're still being good little sheep.
Good little sheep, yeah.
And that is Harold's point, isn't it? If you're not prepared to be a fully human being, then look forward to the fate of a sheep.
Yeah, that's it.
You may well sign your own death warrant.
Yeah, and did you manage to see Danny Dyer did a documentary about working with Harold Pinter? He did it on Sky.
I did see that.
Sky Arts over Christmas. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. He touched on Pinter's political side as well, and it cut to an interview with him on Good Morning Britain with Piers Morgan at the time, and he just quite clearly on national television just went, "Wait, where's that twat David Cameron? Why isn't he answering for anything else?" And you could see everyone going, "Oh, you can't say that." But no, you could tell he hung around with Pinter. You can tell he's got that vibe about him to say, no, this system, whatever this is a load of shit. And
that's exactly why why Harold discovered Danny, because Danny walked into an audition with Harold and went,
right,
he didn't really know who Harold Pinter was, but Harold recognised that spark of, individuality and so on.
Yeah. I think he said he reminded him of. Danny thinks that he reminded Harold a bit of himself growing up.
I don't think there's any doubt about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Because Harold was a London boy, wasn't he? He grew up in, was it East London? Was it East London he grew up, or was it?
He grew up on the Bulls Pond Road in Hackney.
In Hackney, yeah. So London boy, typical upbringing. Would have. I think someone made a very good point. I think his early years, because he was a child of the war, he would have been playing on bomb sites as a young man. He wouldn't have known that much. His early few years of London and where he lived was this complete desolation, this area of complete, it was a country trying to rebuild itself from possibly one of the most horrific events that this country, let alone the world, has ever seen, the Second World War. Do you think that, having known Harold, you were, not only did you work with him, but you're being a very close friend of his, that darkness, I think, I suppose you could call it darkness, or it could be this very low, very dark vibe about Harold's upbringing, that was something that stuck with him as a kid and therefore progressed into his adult life and into his plays. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would. And I'd go further, that, we're probably all born with some mysterious sense of purpose that needs to be activated by a mixture of parents and education and teachers and life. And in Harold's case, the thing that he was born with was the sensibility of a poet. He was born like that.
Mm.
He started writing poetry at a very early age, 10, 11 years old. And the war and the destruction around him, and then inevitably, because he was Jewish, the discovery of what had been going on in Europe in the camps and with the Nazis and the final solution, so-called final solution, the Holocaust.
Yeah.
All of that activated that poetic thing that was already in him in an incredibly particular way, and it took this form of a kind of passionate humanism, which particularly in later years became actual activism. He was prepared to sit on platforms and use his name, but all through his life, the experience of being in the war, being evacuated, separated from his mum and dad when he was 8, 9 years old, seeing houses on his street bombed out, his own back garden burning one night from an incendiary bomb that landed.
Wow.
The school that they went to, Henry Woolf tells us about how the school that he went to was wiped out by a flying bomb. We have no. I mean, I'm 59, and until this pandemic, I've never lived through anything that's affected everybody in this very quite traumatic and distressing way.
Yeah, me too.
My parents lived through, Kennedy's assassination and the Cuban Missile Crisis, where the Russians and Americans pointed nuclear weapons at each other. But it's nothing compared to what people like Harold and Henry and my mum and, or probably your grandparents, what they lived through in terms of their actual lived experience.
Yeah.
The trauma of people dropping ordnance from above to try and kill them. We get upset if someone drives a car at 30 miles an hour down the street, but we've got nothing to compare their experience to their experience.
Nothing at all.
So yes, Harold's political sensibility was married to his poetic sensibility at a very early age, because he knew, and the Jewish thing is very important in the education of that. He knew how badly human beings could behave, and I think he found it impossible to separate just because he wanted to write for the stage. I mean, he didn't know he wanted to write for the stage until Henry said, "Why don't you write a play?" I mean, he'd had ideas, but it was Henry saying, "Write a play. I've got a theatre." That was, until that point, Harold had always said, "One day I might write a play." My point is that there was no way that Harold could be a writer of any kind without including what you call that dark side, that darkness, the knowledge. If you have that knowledge at the age of 9, 10, 11, 12, that there are people who want to kill you because you're Jewish, or there are people who want to kill you because you're black, or just extrapolate it into any kind of blind prejudice. And you see a lot of it in Pinter. You see characters who are racist. You see in the very first play, The Room, the black character who arrives blind and black, and he arrives and is murdered by a white racist thug. So Harold was only too well aware of how human beings could simply act out their most primitive and brutal urges out of fear of something other, something different, something that they didn't understand or relate to because they're too ignorant. And I mean, you see it in these early plays. You see it more crudely expressed, and then it's very interesting to realize it in those later plays where he's writing plays that actually have politicians in them, that it's become very subtle compared to, a racist murder in the first play. It's become about how people with power use and abuse language rather than actually, kicking heads in. They get other people to do that for them. The plays become about the disgusting, the kind of kidnapping of the power of language to conceal your true motives, which are always in Pinter's plays, they're always to do with power, and true motives of politicians to use, and they use language to conceal what they are really doing. And the current batch of, I mean, if Harold wasn't dead already, then watching these Tories and Boris Johnson, he'd have a fucking heart attack every day.
He would be. Oh God, I can only imagine. Just slightly changing the subject slightly. I mean, just the way that actually so on those lines there about the whole government thing. I think Harold has really woken me up to, particularly his plays of the political, just the vast nature of just how awful it is for years. It's funny how it's kind of reverberating its way into sort of our lives in a way. We're waking up to it as well. Because I remember one night with my dad, we foolishly had one of those briefings on where like Boris Johnson or Matt Hancock come out and say, oh, we're doing this, we're doing that. And at the end of it, my dad who's very quiet throughout most of these things, he walked in, and as Matt was saying, okay, that's our briefing for today, thank you very much. Dad just went, right, all done? Yeah, good. Sort of, Matt. We've got better things to watch than you. So, and it's funny how that's sort of coming out really. But more specifically with Pinter, is that I think that there's an amazing quote of his, which I know I'm not going to get right now, so just bear with me. I think this is I'll get as close to it as I can, where he says, beneath the word spoken is the truth unspoken.
Being unspoken.
Which I thought was fantastic. It's just fantastic. And I suppose, do you think because of the nature of because politics is so, clouded in bullshit and just clouded in so much fake stuff, and we don't actually know what's going on behind the scenes, is that why do you think Harold wrote in the way that he did, in the fact that we have to do a lot of work to try and understand what it is he's actually talking about?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. He did grow up listening to a lot of comedy on the radio, back in the 30s and 40s. So there were outside influences. He also, he fell in love with gangster films, American gangster films, French films, Russian films. So he was very precocious. He was reading and watching these films much earlier than any of his friends. He was, in libraries reading Dostoevsky and so forth in his early teens.
Wow.
Discovered Beckett and so on. So he was exposed, and also because he read a lot of poetry and he read a lot of Shakespeare. Still quite young. So he was kind of immersed in an awareness, a very early awareness, much earlier awareness than most of us had, that you could use language in certain ways to say two things at the same time. Now, that's basically what we call irony, isn't it? Irony, I mean, the meaning I take from the word irony is that there are two stories going on at once. So, he was very much aware not least from reading things like Shakespeare, that take Hamlet, for example. We know a murder has taken place because the very first thing we see is the ghost of Hamlet's father looking for Hamlet so he can say, "You've got to avenge my murder." Right? So we've got Hamlet who knows that something terrible has happened, but then we've got Claudius, his uncle, who is now king and married to his mum, going around being a politician saying, "Everything's fine. What a pity that chap died.
Nothing to see here, nothing to see here.
Nothing to see, nothing to do." And Hamlet is busy turning to the audience and saying, "These motherfuckers."
Yeah, it's like
these motherfuckers.
Have you seen this? This is absolute crap. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah,
and then we get to watch Hamlet trying to change the outcome, trying to affect the situation. Now he's got his own personal challenges because he's unfortunately he's very badly designed to be a revenge hero.
Yeah.
But eventually he gets it going. You know, if he'd stabbed Polonius through the fucking arras a bit earlier, maybe Hamlet would have lived to tell. He might have survived. You know, if he got his warrior mojo going sooner. But do you see what I'm saying? That the Harold would have read those stories, and also, of course, the plays. He fell completely in love with the plays of John Webster. You know, Duchess of Malfi. Those plays, which have incredible language in them. And so he knew that language could do this thing of telling two stories at the same time. And he also, I suppose, because of his own dark sense of humour. I mean, don't forget, he and Henry and most of the guys that became the gang were Jewish. Most of them were Jewish. So they weren't Orthodox. They weren't wearing the clothes the whole time or going to synagogue. They had a certain kind of liberal, they had freedom, but they knew that by being Jewish, whether they liked it or not, they were targets. So they used to go and wind up the fascists. They would go along to the fascist meetings in the East End, and they'd take a copy of, you know, Baudelaire or Camus or in order to basically intimidate these thugs, and who would then turn around and say, "Oh, what, you read poetry, do you puff?" And wind them up. They were doing that, you know, at the age of 17, 18 years old. So obviously this amused Harold. He saw from hand experience that it had a very powerful way of winding people up, people who wanted to target him, people who wanted to use race as a way of saying we are superior to you. They could be very easily wound up, and it made them laugh. It made Harold and his mates feel powerful.
I'm sure it did.
That these people were so easily provoked and manipulated. A few times they got into fights, broken bottles, bicycle chains, iron bars. Obviously, the worst didn't happen, but it was real.
Yeah.
So Harold knew that there was a line, and if you cross that line, you better be fucking careful.
Yeah.
But he wanted to walk that line rather than be cowed and rather than be told to shut up and do as you're told. He refused, and he insisted. So you see what I mean? That irony, that sense of dramatic irony of making the audience. I mean, obviously in Hamlet's case, he's telling the audience.
Yeah.
What Harold began to do, which is called, we call it modernism, is, he took the direct address to the audience out, like Shakespeare, and he left it for the audience to figure it out. Work it out on your own. What's really going on here? We're not going to tell you anymore. We're not, we've got to go beyond that now. We've now got to the point where we've got to talk about life. Can the theatre actually try to tell about life as it really is? Because when a character in Shakespeare, like Hamlet, turns to the audience and says, "Oh, what a
rogue and peasant slave
am I," it feels like real life, but of course it's completely artificial in the sense that nobody ever turns to somebody else on a bus unless they're mad and starts speaking poetry. So Harold and the modernists, James Joyce, Ernest Hemingway, all these people that Harold, particularly the poets that he fell in love with, who were using language to try and break through to the deeper truths. They started to basically say, we don't have any obligation to help the audience anymore. And we think that way we can actually tell more of the truth than the poetic thing of someone talking in soliloquies about how they feel. We're not going to talk about how we feel. We're going to leave the audience entirely up to themselves to figure out what's really going on. As long as the audience is intelligent and can listen for the clues, they will get there.
Mm.
But there are a lot of people who find metaphor and irony quite challenging. So, I mean, I directed The Dumbwaiter in the West End, like in 2006, I suppose. Wow. And, some of the critics said, this was a 50-year-old play, so it wasn't as if they hadn't had a chance to read it. But some of the critics said, who is Wilson? Who is this mysterious Wilson? Is Wilson God? All this kind of horseshit, instead of actually looking at what's on the page, which is to say that there is someone, as you said, there's someone in the hierarchy who's fucking with them.
Yeah.
So people can still miss the point if they choose to.
Yeah.
And a lot of people do, because with Pinter especially, a lot of critics and people who think that they're very intelligent don't like being made to feel uncomfortable. So what's Harold going to do?
He's going to make them feel uncomfortable as possible. Yeah, it's incredible. That's such an interesting insight into it. And I think that translates really well into the way that he conducted himself in the rehearsal room, because over the first lockdown I listened to a few podcasts of people who actually worked with Harold, people like Michael Sheen and Anna Massey and people like that, and just some of the stories that you hear coming out of the rehearsal room, like he was almost saying to his actors as well as the audience, you need to work it out for yourself. There's just a couple stories, if I may. There was one brilliant one where, I'm not sure who it was, but an actor turned around to him in a rehearsal room and said to him, like, Harold, what's their motivation in this scene? What's their backstory? Where have they come from? And he brilliantly turned around and said, mind your own fucking business. And
I can tell you who he said that to, because it's amazing to think of it. But I don't know if you've heard of him, but the actor was Alan Ayckbourn, who became one of the most successful playwrights of all time. But no, Alan Ayckbourn was, a young actor playing Stanley in The Birthday Party, which Harold was directing the second ever production of The Birthday Party.
That is incredible.
I'll send you a little document which will tell you the whole story.
Please do.
But yeah, look, I know all these stories because, of course, I've told them myself to so many workshops and classes. But Harold would help if he could.
Yeah.
But often there was a point where he actually he felt it was more truthful to say, look, the author has no further information at this point. I can give you my own take on it, but if you want to know chapter and verse, I don't have it. And he meant that. He was being genuine. He wasn't obscure for the sake of it. It was just because he believed that his characters had their own life and their own volition, and everything you needed to know about the character was on the page. You just had to adapt you just had to listen more acutely, or, and this is from an acting point of view more interesting, accept the ambiguity and live with it. Now, what does that mean in practice for an actor? When you've rehearsed the play and you come to that bit in the play where you still aren't exactly 100% positive what a line means or what you're doing to the other character at that moment. How do you coexist with that ambiguity and still feel like you can give your best performance? That's a wonderful, wonderful challenge for an actor.
It is.
Because the truth is, you can coexist with that ambiguity, but you first got to surrender to that ambiguity rather than feel that there can surely only be one way to play the line.
It's also
when you work with I'll say one more thing.
Yeah.
When you work with a writer like Harold, you might do 2, 3, 4 weeks rehearsal and still come into the previews and the press night and think, well, I don't know, I'll do my best with that line, but you might have 3 different ways you could play that line, and they all work. And the director says, they all work. And your other actor says, I love all 3 when you do all 3. So which do you play? Well, there's two ways. Either you can plan it, or you can trust how it comes out on the night, and that's enough. And the latter strategy is the most exciting, because then you're really, truly being present for the moment rather than over-controlling the delivery and the way the audience receive it. Let the audience work it out for themselves. Let yourself be free to go with the impulse as you feel it on the night. And that's a great, that is why Harold is so exciting from an acting point of view. Because as an actor, you find that you have to learn to trust yourself more, and let go of trying to be perfect, trying to get it right. Now, that's only a writer who has been an actor could pay you that compliment, I think.
Yeah. No, you took the words right out of my mouth. I was just about to say that's such a liberating thing. Like, you could go into a rehearsal room and think, okay, well, because actually I think if you think of it that way, some actors go into rehearsal rooms they've done all this really intense research and like, okay, this point I need to be like this point I need to be like this. But if you go into Harold's rehearsal room, it's just so it's like just play it as you want to play it. And I think there was a story I listened to. I think Charlie from Run Ahead Shouting suggested a podcast that I can't remember who you did it with, but it was with Douglas, who had done quite a few of Harold's.
Oh, Douglas Hodge.
Douglas Hodge, that's it. And he told this brilliant story about him getting in a rehearsal room of, you were there, you heard it, but of saying, he said to Harold, look, I'm just going to throw this out there, okay? I think it could be this, I think it could be this, it could be this, and motivation is this, motivation is that. And he went, sounds good. It gave absolutely nothing away. And, I think at first, it's just, there's a frustration there to sort of say, no, but I need to get it right. But Howard's saying, no, you don't. You don't need to get it right. Just live off the impulses. And again, was it Henry Wolf said, again in that podcast, he said, for someone who approaches Pinter for the first time, what advice would you give? And he said, play it down the middle of the pitch. Or something like that. But just
it's cricket metaphors work very well with Pinter. Not least because Pinter was absolutely mad about cricket, and therefore it was completely natural to him to see things, and he loved sport generally. Combat on the field. Like, he loved squash, he loved tennis, he loved ping pong. He was a sprinter, he was a centre forward. He loved the whole competitive thing. And it's very easy as an actor to try and put one's own special spin on a line of Pinter. And that's fine. But it's fine to try that and test the lines that way. But actually, Henry's point, which I've always taken to heart, is better to listen to the rhythm of the line, listen to the sound of the line, rather than overthink the very particular special meaning that only I could bring to the line. That rhythm and that music and that sound, especially the sounds of the language, the actual sounds you make, the vowel sounds and the consonants and the combinations of sounds, and repetition is so much a part of Harold's writing, because he is he has certain poetic techniques that he uses again and again and again, and those are so much more to do with the fact that the meaning of the line comes out of the sound. The meaning of the line has a dimension which is more than the actor can do on his or her own by thinking. You can release the bigger dimensions of Pinter by paying more attention to rhythm and sound, and that's why Henry says play the ball straight back down the pitch, because if you do that, then the possibility of the other dimensions being released is more possible. If you try and do all the work to the line, then actually you might well not be able to release the bigger poetic dimensions. And it's the best Pinter productions are the ones where both these dimensions are operating at the same time. The invisible, the below the line, the subtext, the sound, the rhythm, the music, all quite subliminal, and then yes, the surface, the actual words themselves, the sense, the communication, the desire, the want of the character, and all those good acting things that we want. So it's a combination, and the outcome then is a whole that contains much more than just the sum of its parts.
Cool. Yeah.
If you ever watch the film, the best example of all this is the film on YouTube of
The Caretaker.
John Gielgud and Ralph Richardson doing No Man's Land.
Oh, what a performance from both of them.
Because they're the two, probably the greatest ever actors, or among the very greatest ever actors, who could actually bring a poetic sensibility to their own delivery. It was their own nature as actors.
Yeah.
So when that technique meets Harold's poetry, you really see how it can be.
Yeah.
And how the sounds of things bring so much extra life to the lines.
Yeah.
And there are other things like, Aston's speech, or Ben and Gus and the Dumb Waiter. It's very monosyllabic. It's almost machine gun-like. It's staccato. It's very short sentences. So with Harold, you get the whole range of musical possibility. He loved the music of Bach, and Bach can be incredibly lyrical, or he can be unbelievably aggressive and punchy and staccato and like a machine gun. So you get it all with Harold. You get it all.
That's incredible. And I'm just curious actually, because we've spoken quite a bit about as you said, the subtext and the blurring of like reality and figure out for yourself kind of thing. But I think there's a moment in The Caretaker with Mick towards the end where he smashes the Buddha, and he just goes on this unbelievably fiery speech to Davis saying, "That's what I want. I've got other things to worry about. I've got this." And I've often wondered, is that a moment where, do you think, for a brief moment, we get a Pinter character in its entirety? Like we see a fully blown, the real side of a Pinter character in that brief moment, albeit it's very brief, because then immediately after it's over, it's like zips himself back up, and it's like no more. But for that brief moment, do you think we get an insight into not only just Mick's inner monologue, but I think Pinter's own inner monologue as well, just for that brief moment?
I think that's a very plausible. I'm just looking for the speech.
It's Act 3, and it's after Davis says, "Oh, your brother, he's nutty. He's nutty."
Trying to find the smashing of the Buddha.
I've got a different. For me, it's on page 119. I'm not sure if you've got a similar one. I've got the Faber and Faber copy. It's after Mick talks about Sidcup. He talks. So you're violent.
Hang on, I found it.
You're violent. You're erratic, and then he's like, "All right, then you do that. You do it if that's what you want." And then Mick goes, "That's what I want. Anyone think this house was all got to worry about? I've got plenty of other things to worry about." And of course, it's this, as Pinter says passionately, it's that for this brief moment we get an insight into what a Pinter character is all about. And it's a very rare, very brief side. So I think it's something to be treasured in Pinter. So we get all this distortion, but then suddenly we get, okay, this is what it's all about. And then that's what makes it, and I think as an audience member especially, because I remember seeing George Mackay do this at the Old Vic a few years ago. And particularly in that moment, I was holding on to my seat. I was thinking, what the flipping hell is going on here? And it's just, the truth came out in a way. Would you agree, or something else?
I do agree. I think it's very local to Mick at that point. I mean, I'm not saying that there isn't something being expressed in that speech that isn't universal that there might be some of Harold in that sense of a sudden kind of volcanic eruption of.
He snaps in that moment.
A snapping out of trying to dress things up and make things pretty and keep things nice. But it seems to me that it's particular to Mick, because so much of Mick, there's so much frustration in that speech because of what Mick has to consider because of his brother. You know, his ambition, that amazing speech about the decorating and how he'd like to kit the house out in all these amazing textures and fabrics and things. How does he know all that? Well, you know, he's clearly got ambitions, creative ambitions.
He's an intelligent bloke. He's
intelligent, and he fancies himself as somebody who can do these things. But how much of that is he actually going to get to do while he's got to look out for his bro? So, you know, he's caught in a bind. He's bound by responsibility and commitment and limitation. Now, I think that's where the universality is that, you know, Harold didn't enjoy the feeling of having his wings clipped at all, and Harold found it very difficult to express his emotions directly. You know, he found the vulnerability of saying how he felt very tricky. He often ran out, for a man of such amazing control of words, he would run out of words where it came to actually trying to express how he felt about things. And the point about that is that he felt things very deeply. Now, I think Mick feels things very deeply. He's brilliant at keeping a kind of surface energy of repartee and banter, and so he's very good at that. He's very good at bullying the tramp.
Oh, very good. Very good.
And victimizing the tramp. But that's the thing about people who victimize other people, are doing so because there's something very uncomfortable going on inside them. So they're trying to get that out and inflict it on someone else, because it's a feeling of release and relief if you can affect someone else with the confusion that you're feeling inside. So I think, yes, it relates to the immense difficulty that particularly men have trying to talk about their feelings, and that certainly is true of Harold. And yes, I think you're right. I think your physical, the little mime you did of someone being unzipped and then suddenly zipping themselves back up, and then everyone else going, what the fuck just happened? Yeah. Who was that guy?
Yeah. What?
I think that's a very interesting and I totally agree with you. Harold, of course, would always insist that was Mick's situation, not Harold's situation, because Harold was very resistant to the idea, which critics have always, you know, tried to do, of turning his plays into autobiography. You know, that everything that happens in a Pinter play must have happened in real life at some point. Of course, that really isn't remotely the case. It's Harold's imagination is simply off the charts. But there are certain things, and I think the frustration and the feeling of having your wings clipped, being so uncomfortable and so enraging. You know, I mean, Harold got married very young. He was a father very young. Therefore he had responsibility very young, and there was still a part of him that was wild and wanted to drink and womanize and not have to be, a responsible person. He wanted to live out all kinds of fantasies, which he did. You know, he had many affairs, and his marriage broke down, and his son wouldn't talk to him, and he fucked a lot of stuff up, which unfortunately a lot of us do, because
we all do.
Until we realise that fantasies are fantasies, but a lot of us only learn by trying to act those fantasies out and then having to deal with the real consequences of it.
Is that?
But many times in Pinter, that's what's going on. Characters are, think of betrayal. Jerry, the one who's having the affair, and that's after Harold's had a long affair himself and his own marriage is broken down. He's actually trying to take a really hard look at what happens when a human being says, I can do that. I'm entitled to do that. I can betray my wife with this other beautiful woman because I need to. I need to have two women. I need to be I need to be with her, and yes, I'm already with her, but I mean, someone's going to get upset at some point, but it's the oldest story in the book. And even Aston, you know, I mean, Mick is trying to live out the fantasy of doing this house up. He's trying to make that real. He wants that to become real. He wants to be as sophisticated as he sees other people being, owning properties, being a man about town, having a way with decoration, having a style, having status, having a bit of money, having a bit of, you know, je ne sais quoi about you. And he's being frustrated because he's not being able to really make that happen the way he wants to. And I don't know, what was Aston doing, kicking off in the cafe when they called the police on him, and it all led one thing led to another, and he ends up in a fucking mental hospital and having all that done to him. It's these moments, and I'm sure Harold was fascinated by these moments in your life where you have a choice, and if you take the wrong choice, it can have a terrible and lasting consequence for the rest of your life. One of the things about Harold is that he attracted. I'm going to send you this story about Alan Ayckbourn doing the birthday party, where you know, this is like 1959 in Scarborough up north. But Harold would attract crazy people. People would come up to Harold and tell them their story, and Harold would be like, "That's just an amazing story you just told me," and people were attracted to Harold. They didn't know it, but they would come up to him and say, "You know, can I tell you my story?" And he knew how insane being a human being can be, because people unburdened themselves to him and told him this wacky, far out stuff.
Incredible. It's such. I feel a bit envious of yourself, the fact that you spent so many years working and knowing Pinter on a personal level as well, and unfortunately I'll never have that experience. Well, if there is something afterwards, then maybe so, but
well, that's why I do what I do. I feel an obligation, a happy obligation,
of course,
to share the privilege that I had of not only working with him but also having a very long friendship. I mean, without question, it was the most important. I mean, all right, my wife is pretty special, but
there's Pinter and then his wife.
being friends with Harold as a man, as a young man, and then that friendship lasted from the time I was 18 until he died. So he died in 2008. So that's already 14 years ago. So
crazy.
A friendship of well over 25 years, or 25 years or more. Not always as close as it was towards the end. We got closer and closer as we got older. But that's why I do what I do, because he's without ever trying to be a teacher, the way that he approached working with actors, working in theatre, trying to create really exciting moments of theatre. He is as good as anybody else has ever been.
And the fact that he just didn't care about the status quo, he decided to shake up the snow globe and just really did that.
Well, he didn't decide to do that. That's who he was.
So he was, yeah.
He never made a decision to, I'm going to change the world. He just said, I can only write the way I see and feel things. It's historians and academics who then say, well, of course, you know, he was part of the angry young men, or he was an absurdist. Harold, the one thing that Harold hated more than anything else was being labelled.
Oh, I can imagine.
But that's what academics and historians do for a living. So, and journalists too.
Yeah.
You know, all through the 1960s, the Daily Mail called him the Jewish playwright. What must have made him feel insane.
Yeah.
But that's the point. He wasn't trying to change the world. He was doing what the only thing he could do which was try and get his voice out.
Yeah.
The way he saw the world, try and get that on the page in as economic and fully realised a way, and then say to actors, "You make of that what you can."
Incredible.
He never had that. You know, David Hare's got it a bit. That kind of arrogance of, well, I'm part of a very important movement in the theatre, and you know, Harold never had that. He had an amazing kind of humility. He also could be a pain in the arse and a prick because he was terrible. He drank, but
oh yeah.
But the truth is he was astonished by his own life and the way it went. He was like continually amazed to find himself so successful. He never lost that kind of quite young, quite kind of adolescent kind of feeling of going out in the world and saying, "Come on then, fucking, I'll take you on." He never lost that.
Good.
But he never knew how it would go. He never knew it would be like, you know, it would go his way.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably the most important thing of all, is that he wrote his plays and all the work he did, not from a place of, you know, look at me, I can swagger it with the best. It was actually, you know, this is all I can do, and I'm doing it the best I can. I have no idea if it's really any good or not. He liked his own work.
Yeah, and that's that above all else is the most important thing, that you enjoy what you do, and you know, don't give a cuss as to what anybody else thinks. Exactly.
You're right.
And this has been great. I'm just curious to know, actually, is it true that Danny Dyer mentioned this in this documentary, that he would sometimes for rehearsals he would show up and sit down at his table and have a glass and a bottle of red wine, and the rehearsal would last as long as the bottle of wine did?
Well, I think that was more coincidental than planned. But and it was always white wine, by the way. But
I was white wine involved, my bad.
But he certainly didn't mind people seeing him drinking in rehearsal, and he liked to have a drink by about, you know, by about noon on most days. He'd have a bottle open. I mean, he'd probably polish off 3 or 4 bottles of white wine or champagne until he was 50. He just drank spirits. He drank brandy and whiskey.
Wow.
And the doctor said to him, "Listen, you're going to fucking kill yourself." So he switched to wine and champagne. But he drank it in great quantities. I mean,
amazing.
It's also true, you know, that quite often rehearsing with him was not as rigorous in terms of just sheer hours. Sometimes, you know, he would rehearse only in the mornings or only in the afternoons, 3 hours, 4 hours. You know, that wasn't just so that he could drink. I mean, he was alcoholic. He was alcoholic. He died of liver failure. So there's no getting away from the fact that that's an alcoholic death. But it was because he didn't feel that overworking. He wasn't a workaholic. He didn't believe that relentless working and more working was in itself a good thing. You know, sometimes with his plays, particularly, I mean, I tended to work on the later ones with him, but they were quite subtle, and overworking it could be counterproductive. So yeah, sometimes the rehearsal would appear to last as long as the bottle, but I think it was as much to do with the fact that he was trying to judge what the right level of intensity was, and that you could overplay the intensity and people get exhausted and a bit dispirited and a bit kind of a bit jaded.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things about working on Pinter's work, as you probably know, is it really tests your relationship with yourself. You know, if you're beating yourself up when you're doing a Pinter play, you know, I'm not getting it right. Why can't I be better than this? What's wrong with me? You know, all that stuff doesn't help at all.
No.
It's a process. You have to trust the creative process, and it will always see you through the creative process. That's the one thing I've learned over 35 years or so of doing all this, is that as long as you understand the creative process, it will always see you through. But there's a bit of the creative process where you descend into the unknown.
Oh, definitely.
And then you find out what your relationship with yourself is really like.
Yeah, it's
because you need a bit of self-coaching to get out of there. It will be okay.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's what I look forward to. I think going back to training again in October, and I think more than anything, and of course in life in general, if something didn't go right, it's fine, it's done, it's in the past. You've made a fool out of yourself. Okay, that's fine. We've all done it. We've all been there. We've all made fools out of ourselves, but we learn from it and we move on, and that's it.
Were you specifically looking at the Aston speech, or?
I was, yeah. I mean, I was hoping to show you actually, but I'm very aware of the time. But I would love to show you at some point if you've got time now, I'll do it. But if we can do this another time, if you have stuff to do.
Well, if you've got it with you and you just want to go for it without putting any great pressure on yourself, but I'm very happy to just listen.
Yeah, sure. I mean, if that'd be great. Actually, if you wouldn't mind, yeah, that'd be good.
Well, if that's partly what you need, then why don't we do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I've pretty much got it in my head now, but I'm just going to have it to my side here, just in case.
Just read it. Don't put any pressure on yourself.
Okay, I'll read it now. It'll be easier. Okay. Here we go. About a week later, they start. Sorry, do you want me to do it with an accent, or do you want me to do it in my own voice?
That's entirely up to you.
I'll do it with my own voice without much. No, own voice or. No, I'll be practicing with an accent. I'll do it with the accent. I'm doing it. About a week later, they started to come round and do this thing to the brain. We're all supposed to have it done in this ward, and they came round and they did it one at a time, one a night. I was one of the last, and I could see quite clearly what they did to the others. They used to come round with these, I don't know what they were. They looked like big pincers with wires on. The wires were attached to a little machine. It was electric. They used to hold the man down, and the chief doctor, used to fit the pincers, something like earphones. He used to fit them on either side of the man's skull. There was a man holding the machine, you see, and he'd turn it on, and the chief would just press these pincers on either side of the skull and keep them there. Then he'd take them off, they'd cover the man up, and they wouldn't touch him again until later on. Some used to put up a fight, but most of them didn't. They just lay there. Well, they were coming round to me, and the night they came, I got up and I stood against the wall. They told me to get on the bed, and I knew they had to get me on the bed, because if they did it while I was standing up, they might break my spine. So I stood up, and one or two of them came for me. Well, I was younger then. I was much stronger than I am now. I was quite strong then. I laid one of them out and had another one round the throat, and suddenly this chief had these pincers on my skull, and I knew he wasn't supposed to do it while I was standing up. That's why... Anyway, he did it. So I did get out. I got out of the place. But I couldn't walk very well. I don't think my spine was damaged. That was perfectly all right. The trouble was, my thoughts had become very slow. I couldn't think at all. I couldn't get my thoughts together. I could never quite get it together. The trouble was, I couldn't hear what people were saying. I couldn't look to the right or to the left. I had to look straight in front of me, because if I turned my head round, I couldn't keep upright. And I had these headaches. I used to sit in my room. That's when I lived with my mother and my brother. He was younger than me. And I laid everything out in order in my room, all the things that I knew were mine, but I didn't die. The thing is, I should have been dead. I should have died. Anyway, I feel much better now. But I don't talk to people now. I steer clear of places like that cafe. I never go into them now. I don't talk to anyone like that. I've often thought about going back and trying to find the man who did that to me. But I want to do something first. I want to build that shed out in the garden. And scene.
Beautiful, isn't it? Beautiful.
It's a wonderful speech. It's.
Well, so I'm going to give you sort of just some general impressions and feedback.
Yeah, go ahead.
Firstly, you do naturally have a natural sense for the rhythm of it, which is great. Mm-hmm. Not everyone does, but you do. It's not a particularly poetic speech, is it? It's very nuts and bolts. But the fact is, most of the time, all of the time, as far as I can hear, you were obviously you were making sense of it. But there is a certain way to observe the rhythm naturally, mm-hmm. whereby you don't misstress things, or you put the stress on the right words. And I think you didn't really put a foot wrong in that. I know you're just reading it, but you didn't put a foot wrong, and that's very reassuring to know that your natural response to it is in the natural rhythm that it's written in. See, what that then does is, I mean, I know that speech quite well, I suppose. I was on stage with Colin Firth at the National Theatre Memorial when Colin did it, and it was 15 years since he played the part, and he got up and sat in a chair, and everyone just wept, you know, because, I mean, Colin isn't everyone's idea of a Pinter actor, but he's a wonderful actor. So the power of the speech is beyond question. But listening to you doing it, I heard things that I really felt I hadn't noticed before. And that's so interesting. And the things I hadn't noticed before were things like, I mean, obviously, I'm fully aware, as you are, of anyway, he did it. The silence before, anyway, he did it. In that silence, there's an entire universe of pain and rage and powerlessness, and he's talking about there being a big physical fight, and him being overpowered. And generally, he's played by quite a big fella. You know, he's a Robert Shaw. The film, you know, and Harold always said that Robert Shaw was very much his idea of Aston. You know, he's a big, powerful guy. So the idea of that guy being subdued by medical orderlies or heavies in a mental hospital, it must have been a terrible, terrible struggle. And then all Aston says about it is, anyway, he did it. So the silence contains all of that. So that I knew about, but there was something that I really felt that I hadn't taken in before, and that was to do with still living at home, the brother being young, living with the mother. I laid out all my things, but I didn't die. And what that suggests to me is that after the lobotomy, he contemplated suicide. That he actually planned to kill himself. Went through some kind of, you know, laying all his things out is a kind of signature of someone preparing to leave this world.
Sort of like the last farewell, in a way.
Like a ritual, like a pre-death ritual.
Yeah.
That you get all your things out, especially if, you know, if you're struggling as he was after the operation to, I mean, he says, you know, he couldn't look to the left or right because it unbalanced him. So obviously the operation profoundly impaired his physical ability, his physical sense of himself. And what I got from listening to you then was that he found that completely unacceptable and intolerable, and therefore planned to end his life. But I didn't die. He says it, but I didn't die. I never really heard. I felt like I heard that for the first time. So that tells you how sensitive he is.
Incredibly.
How distressed he must have been. How he must have felt his life was over. And all of that has to inform the whole story of Aston through the play, not just this speech.
Yeah.
But it's got to be the underpinning of absolutely every moment on stage, because he's chosen to live. He could kill himself.
Yeah.
Anyone can kill themselves. Just go to a fucking go to a bridge and go to a motorway bridge and throw yourself off. Go to a railway line and get yourself in front of a train. It's gonna end it. But he didn't die, and he's in some way had to try to reconcile himself to being like this. I used to be like that. They did that to me. Now I'm like this. And at one point, I may have wanted to die, but I didn't die. So, in everything he does, he's carrying with him both who he used to be when he was all right, and who he has had to accept that he is now and continue living. Now that's how do you act that? Well, you can't act it. You can only be it. You can only find a way of being that is an adaptation of you that nevertheless can invite in the feeling that even though Oliver the actor hasn't had those experiences himself, that you can imagine what it might be like to have had those experiences and to carry them wherever you go. And the other lines that he says, which are so telling and important in this respect, is, for example, I could never quite get it together.
That's a powerful line, I think.
It's incredibly telling, isn't it?
Yeah.
And also, I had headaches.
Yeah.
So he's got loss of balance, disorientation, headaches. He's been suicidal. He's chosen not to die. Maybe he had to be resuscitated. Maybe he tried to hang himself, but they found him and they cut him down. Or maybe he took pills, or we don't know. That's all for you, the actor, to decide. But the fact is, you've somehow got to connect to these possibilities in imagination, and then adapt your being so that Aston can come through you in some way. But these physical things are probably the key. That the mental things would come out of finding a way of being slower, of finding a way of being restricted in your movement, of finding a way to embody needing to keep your eyes straight ahead so that you don't get that wobbly feeling of, oh fuck, I'm going to fall over if I look too quickly to the right or left. To root it in the physical rather than root it in how do I say these lines, how do I make the lines mean everything that they could mean, to actually go through a more grounded, maybe using some of your Laban, to imagine the physical consequences of everything he's been through, and then begin to let the lines connect to that. Because if you don't, George Mackay for me was a bit kind of 50-50.
Oh, yeah.
But Danny Mays, I thought he was beautiful. I thought he absolutely found a way. Quite a radical way. I'd never seen an Aston before who had a big limp. Do you remember the way Danny was moving himself around the stage?
Yeah.
He almost was dragging that leg behind it.
Yeah, it was
It was big.
It was big. It was a big limp.
It was very theatrical. I'd never seen anyone do it that so theatrically. If you look at Robert Shaw in the film, it's minimal.
It's very subtle. Very, very
It's
subtle.
very subtle. Both ways work. Maybe one works better for film and one works better for theatre. But nevertheless, there is a huge connection to the physical world of the character, and a trusting that the lines will then connect to that and come through that. But I thought you read it very, very well, and obviously the pace, not the speed so much, but the pace. I thought you played the pauses and the silences very well, but you're obviously under no obligation to be in a hurry. You really can take your time. It mustn't become so slow and broken up that it becomes self-indulgent, and most of all, it mustn't be sentimental. which, you know, you didn't for a minute go down that road, but there are people who, and maybe it would be a good road to explore as part of the rehearsal process. But ultimately, Harold doesn't want these lines to be played for pity or for sentiment. He doesn't want the audience feeling sorry for Aston.
No.
You want the audience thinking, how the hell would I deal with this? How would I deal with them forcing me to wear these pincers and then putting electric current through my brain? You want the audience to see Aston as a mirror and catch their own reflection.
Yeah.
So that they would consider that their own relationship to, you know, their bodies and, you know, thank fuck I'm fully present. And I mean, another way of saying that, I suppose, is that Aston can very much be played as somebody with a tremendous and deep courage.
He is courageous. I think one thing I get from this conversation is that the strength of him he's been through this unbelievably traumatic experience, and he could have just thought, you know what, I can't live with this, just jump in front of a train and just have it over with. But for him to say, okay, look, let's just try and reconcile this, let's just forgive myself for what's happened, forget about what some idiot or this evil man did to me in this mental home, and just let's just try and make my life better. And the fact that he's just doing something as simple as that, the strength in that, the mental strength and the physical strength as well, just to carry on, whether it was with a Daniel May's long limp or Robert Shaw's little limp, I think is unbelievable courage. And I think with Douglas Hodge even suggested he was a saint in some ways, that he has a saintly figure. I mean, we're not saying he's perfect, but the fact that he's been through all, like, you know, Christ on the cross, you know, he's been through this and yet still finds a way to forgive. And
well, I think that I loved hearing Doug talk about that. I really did. It was very enlightening. But another thing I got from listening to you was Aston must also, I think, believably be capable of going and finding that guy and breaking his neck.
I think he would. I think he'd like to do that. I think he would.
So that's not so saintly.
No, he's not perfect. I'm not saying he's perfect, but he has courage, but he's not perfect. So
he's still capable of going to a place in himself that is profoundly dark and destructive. So it's complex, you know. It's really complex.
It is.
And it's also the fact that he says, but I want to do something first, and it's all about the shed. That's also potentially pathetic, because he can't even change a fucking plug on a piece of flex. So you know, he spends the whole play trying to do this damn toaster plug. So how the hell is he ever going to put a shed up?
I don't know.
Well, there's a wonderful sequence, you know, that Harold wrote just for the film, where they go out, him and Alan Bates go out in the garden, and there's a little pond, and they just stare into the pond in the garden, and then there's a shot of some wood just stacked up against the fence, or just sitting in the garden.
Yeah.
And you know, you can see Alan Bates looking at him, thinking, "Mate, if you ever get that shed together, I'm going to buy you a pint." You know. So it's complex. It's really complex.
Yeah, I didn't realise Harold wrote that just for the film. Just
well, of course, because there's no exteriors in the play.
Yeah.
But anything that's exterior in that film is written into the screenplay of the movie. And I recommend. I think you can probably find it on YouTube.
It is. The whole thing's on YouTube. Yeah.
But look, what I'm saying is, see if you can find the director's commentary track, because on the DVD that I've got, the BFI DVD of The Caretaker, there is a director's commentary track where Clive Donner and Alan Bates talk all over the movie about how they made it, and it's absolutely wonderful.
I need to listen to that.
I wouldn't be surprised if it's on YouTube somewhere. You just need to put, you know, The Caretaker, Clive Donner, director's commentary. Just, you never know. You might be lucky.
Cool.
So I think I don't have much else to say about your reading of it. I think it's incredibly promising, and the work to do on the text should be done at the same time as thinking about the physical impact and the impact on his function being very, very seriously changed by the operation.
Yeah.
And to begin to experiment, I suppose, with a different way of moving, a slowness, a carefulness, a reaction to headaches. I mean, if you were living with all this stuff all the time, I've had chronic illness at times in my life, and you do adapt radically. You change. After a while, you begin to change your behaviour, because if you do that too quickly, you're going to fall over, or if you do that too fast, you're going to have a spasm. So you change, and you begin to move differently. Now that's just with a bad back or chronic arthritis or something. But if it was to do with a brain thing that changed you forever, and was never going to go back to normal, you'd have to go through some quite radical changes of habit and changes of reflex and reaction. It would become ingrained. It would become a second nature, a different way of being.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think that the last thing I'll say about it is, these things are of more use to you in rehearsal than fixating on getting the lines right and finding the perfect way to say the lines.
Yeah, it's all about...
Because how can the lines can't be disconnected or divorced from the intelligence that they're coming out of, the human being. So try and find more of the human being, and then trust the lines will flow naturally from that.
Absolutely. That's what it all boils down to. That's just the physical.
Well, it does. But as we said before, with Pinter, it can be tempting to get into, I could say it this way, or I could put a bit of leg spin on it and do it that way, or I could, all that is slightly too heady, a bit too analytic.
Yeah.
In my experience.
Yeah. Good stuff. But it's good to know that's part of how I think you have, not only just the Pinter text, but I think texts in general, I suppose, or just anything.
Yes.
And
really good writing certainly always has that dimension to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
A lot of TV writing doesn't, and actors have to just kind of find a good way to say the lines.
You have to just.
But good writing for the theatre, especially any writing that has a poetic dimension to it, there are always those layers, and the joy of it is to go diving in the depths and figure out how you uniquely, you're very different from me, and we're very different from Doug, and Doug's very different from Danny Mays, and so forth. We're the reason why some plays can be done again and again and again is because there's so much that's universal in the writing that many different people playing those parts will reveal many different things that still hold our interest, that can still make it feel like you're hearing it for the first time.
Yeah,
that's why we go and see 6 different actors playing Hamlet, because if they're all good, then they're all going to find that a different magic.
Yeah, I remember speaking to someone on a drama school board who was sat on audition panels year after year after year, who hear very similar speeches every year of Shakespeare, like Hamlet, Iago, Othello, Richard III. But she says, bizarrely, every single year they'll hear a speech they've heard a million times before, and they'll still hear something different every year, and they'll think, "Oh, I never thought about it that way." And I said that way makes so much more sense than how I saw it before. So I think that's one of the many reasons why I think Pinter's plays will stand the test of time, and Shakespeare will be here, I think, until for however long the planet turns. Well, be here forever, I think.
I totally agree. I mean, it's that universality. I don't know whether you've done much work with the word archetype, but it's the archetypal nature of being a human being.
Yeah.
That doesn't. That's why mythology is so powerful, because a story could have been written down 20,000 years ago and still hit us between the eyes. Like, how the fuck do they know that about me? And that's really the the root of the whole way of seeing things through archetypes. It's so interesting how something very, very old and apparently ancient can speak to right now, to this moment.
That's incredible. Yeah. I think that.
Well, listen, I better stop, but it's been great to talk to you.
Yeah. I was just about to say, I think that is a brilliant point to end. I think, and everything else can. We've talked about so much, and this has been incredibly helpful. So thank you so much for being so generous with your time. And
it's a pleasure.
Yeah, and hopefully I'll get the chance to speak to you again at some point in the future.
Well, that's absolutely possible and fine. Please do consider that you can always reach out. I'm going to send you an email and with a couple of things on it, and I put my PayPal on there as well, so you can just bung 20 quid in there.
Yep.
And keep in touch. Let me know how it goes.
Yeah, we'll do, man. Once again, thank you so much. I'll keep in touch with the Run Ahead Shouting crowd, and keep those Pinter stuff coming and stuff on there. But I'm sure I'll talk to you again soon. I still have so many more questions about Pinter. I could talk to you all day about him. I really could. But
Well, I may do some classes. You know, I've got another couple of jobs to do between now and beginning of June. But I think after that, I mean, please God, there's no more lockdown. But you never know. we might all find ourselves trapped, needing things to do. So I think I will do some more online. Classes, acting classes.
Good. Well, count me in. I'll be there. So.
All right, mate. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, man. Take care, man.
And you.